am so excited to be having this conversation with my very good friend, someone I admire and just respect her voice and opinion so much on this Georgia election special of The Way with Anoa. That's by me, Anoa Changapek. Talking about just news, analysis, commentary, politics, and a little pop culture sprinkled in. And, Renita and I are both here in Georgia. We are voters, organizers, engaged in all the things. And Renita is also a former elected official and has run statewide. I couldn't think of anyone better to talk with me just about like all the things and really like grounding this moment we're in nationally as we're heading into this final week of the Georgia election, the primary election cycle. So Renitta Shannon, thank you so much for joining me and making time this afternoon.
Absolutely. Well, Anoa, I always think of you as our Ida B. Wells of Georgia, and at some point it'll be nationally. So I'm very excited to be here.
I appreciate you so much for saying that. And I was talking with my son, your birthday twin,
Hmm.
about Ida B. Wells in this moment because he rushed into my room recently and he was just like, "Did you see what happened in Tennessee? Did you see this?" Because that's always his thing, right? And I'm like, "Of course I saw that." And his immediate thing is like, "And this is why I don't think that voting matters." Now, for context, that's where he is. He will still show up at
Hmm.
the polls because mommy will still make sure that we all get to the
Right.
polls in our household. But we are having this ongoing dialogue right now.
Hmm.
But like, there is something very real that we're seeing happening that people have been warning and talking about for years. But we're literally watching yet another Supreme Court case like that has like life altering and that's not hyperbole, right? Life altering impact on the entire way we show up and do this business of our democracy. We have seen the immediate backlash from, predominantly former Confederate states. Um, and then we're also grappling with all the things we're already dealing with here in Georgia, right? With our primary
Hmm.
election, particularly on the Democratic side. And so I just want to kind of get a sense from you, Renier, like how are you processing like this moment and like holding the duality of these things, right? We've just literally watched the Supreme Court and then all these different states attack, undermine, uh, you know, put us on a path towards mass disenfranchisement in a way we haven't seen in really since pre 1965. Um, just like how you're grappling with that, also with the urgency, the importance, and the opportunity with our primary, our elections happening here in Georgia.
Sure. So immediately, when I saw what happened with the SCOTUS decision, and also when I saw what immediately happened in Tennessee and then Alabama, what stood out to me was when I served in the Georgia House of Representatives, which I served for 6 years and then ran for lieutenant governor. One of the things that I would always say from like an organizing perspective, to folks in the public was that, we're past the point in time where it is for the most part an accomplishment just to get a Black person elected. Like we're past that point. We need to start making sure that we are electing the right types of Black folks to office and having representation that's truly going to fight for us. So when I saw this decision come down, and when I saw what happened in Tennessee and Alabama, it felt like wow, like this could literally take us back to it's just it's accomplishment just to get a Black person elected
Yeah.
because immediately Tennessee moved to basically get rid of its only one and only majority Black district. And so um I am hoping that out of this moment, Democrats are going to see in a very real way why it is so important to for voters to actually feel the difference in the folks that get elected on the left. So honestly, to
Hmm.
what your son said, I'm not mad at him for that. I mean, that is a real thing that
Yeah.
people who are his age feel because that is what they've seen, and even people who are older. And so I do think, and I've said this for a while now, a lot of folks spend a lot of time on browbeating saying, well, voters need to vote more, vote. Sure, we can always increase what our vote looks like. But at the end of the day, I think more of the responsibility is on elected officials to really make people's vote count. And when I say that, I mean provide tangible wins. And so some
Hmm.
of what happened with this Supreme Court, Supreme Court is their job is to interpret law. It's not to make law. When you have laws that are ironclad, like if the Voting Rights Act, a new Voting Rights Act had been passed under the last Biden administration, we wouldn't be in a situation where the Supreme Court could just make a decision and easily rip away our rights, the way they just did with this SCOTUS decision, abortion, plenty of issues. This is why it was so important for for, I would say, the Democratic Party to really be doing its job. And it's giving us grave consequences because that was not done.
Appreciate like where you put that like focus, right, in terms of credibility and accountability, because I really do think that it's really easy to be never Trump, to put this at the
Hmm.
feet of the Trump administration. Or just even talking about, I've seen content creators, people talking about like, do you know about the Powell memo? Like, this is a long strategy. All that is true. But
Hmm.
what are we telling people about what is going to be different if we ask them to join us in these things? The other thing that I really do appreciate that you name in terms of like for candidates and elected officials, people who are engaging in these processes and wanting our votes, we're not just showing up. The fight and the work is not just so that we can crown new leaders, right? Or anoint new leaders, right? It's about who are the people who are going to go into these institutions, whether it's the People's House, whether it's the White House, the governor's mansion in your state, mayor, who
Hmm.
are the people who are going to go into these positions and represent the issues that we all know we need as civil society to move us all forward, right?
Hmm.
And I think like that shift is something that we need to adopt. I think candidates themselves need to be more, people, and we hear that language a bit more, especially we've seen the rise of more progressive candidates over the last several years, but we need more that people first, not just in
Hmm.
terms of how they're campaigning and engaging, but what you said about like the showing up of the tangibles, because that co-governance, like our work also doesn't stop at the vote, right? It continues alongside, but we need elected officials who are going to be able to make sure that, our voices are heard, our agenda issues are being addressed. Or in the case where we're thinking about, our elections here, we're talking about, if we are able to flip, at any portion of the statewide seats, and we still don't quite have the legislature we need. Do we have the leadership that can block bad bills? Right? Do we have
Right.
leadership that we can count on to make sure that harmful legislation isn't being passed to move through the legislature? So like, there's like so many layers to this
Hmm.
conversation, but like, what when we're thinking about the Georgia of it all, right? And like what we need in this moment, it seems, Renita, to me like we're having this existential crisis in democracy. We're having this existential crisis because of like the resurgence of this abusive white supremacist focus on domination and control
Hmm.
that actually is detrimental to all of us, right? Except for
Right.
like a very
Right.
select class of people.
Hmm.
Um, and I know that conflict, a lot of us as human beings are conflict averse. I know there's a lot of
Hmm.
anxiety around a lot of things. And there seems like people just have this desire to want to just get back to normal, or to just like, if we could just block all this out and just focus on our little corner of the world, you know, can we just do that right now, Renita, in Georgia in this election? Like, can we just like, none of that matters, just like kind of just stay in the cozy middle and
You
just
are
pretend
raising
all the other things don't need like is that real? Is that real,
you
Vernita?
you're raising my blood pressure by
I'm so
asking
sorry,
me
my
this
friend.
question because this was literally the bane of my existence the entire time that I served, because I just felt like it's fine if some folks are conflict averse, if that's for the voters, but when you are in elected office, folks need to be in there fighting. I went into the Capitol every single day with the attitude of let's be ready to kick these people's teeth in, meaning the conservatives and the Republicans who don't want us to have rights that we should not even have to argue about. So much of the what has happened on the left, and let me just say this to be clear: the only people I blame for what is happening right now, whether you're talking about SCOTUS or whether you're just talking about what's happened
Hmm.
largely in the country, are the folks who voted for the
Oh,
Trump administration.
absolutely,
That's
absolutely,
where all the blame belongs.
absolutely.
I don't blame third party voters. I do not blame people who chose not to vote. As a candidate, it is your job to make sure that you are making a compelling enough case for people to want to come out and vote for you. But I say that your question raises my blood pressure because for too long, Democrats have just done it's almost like, and I've said this all the time, like Democrats have too much of, they care too much about what Republicans think about them. And that coming in makes you reticent to fight because you want to be liked by these people. I never cared if I was liked by Republicans.
You weren't
And I
trying to
actually
go to
ended
the
up,
softball game.
I'm sorry?
You weren't trying to play softball with them.
No, no, not at all. So, no. And I think that all of this has come to bite us in the ass. And it makes me think about exactly how, if you study how fascist movements move, um, Mussolini was able to rise to power in Italy because of a lot of what was going on with what you would consider as like their liberal or left party. They just did a lot of status quo, and people became more and more apathetic as it related to elections. They felt like they weren't getting any fight out of the people who were supposed to be fighting back on their behalf. And all that did was allow fascism to take over because it depresses the vote. So that's why that question raises my blood pressure, because apathy, that's the reason why we're in this situation. Of course, it's the folks who voted for Trump 100% because they voted for this bullshit. But the other part of this is all the missed opportunities that elected leaders on the Democrat side, on the left, could have really taken in order to prevent all of what we're seeing. Biden was like, oh, well, I don't want to do anything with the filibuster rule. I don't want to change the filibuster. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Okay, well, you've done nothing, and now we're getting everything that we did not want.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that clarification too. Like, you are absolutely correct, right? Like, I think that, yes, when we talk about like where the blame lies, but also like what were the missed opportunities, right? And like how we come out of this more resilient and more nimble, right? Because this is uncharted territory for a lot of us who have just been coming of age or being a part of political space in the last, couple of decades. Like, we have not necessarily been here, right? And I think what you were saying though too about like just even, and I know folks are like, oh, we don't necessarily want to relitigate the past, but I think there was two things from what you just said about like candidates did not make the case necessarily. There are a lot of things that account for 2024 and how it went down, but there was also a lot of talking over people or at them and not to them and with them to hear the real concerns. When we think about the hundreds of thousands of people here in Georgia who stayed home, or the millions around the country who stayed home, and how that made a difference. And this is not to get into like the blame game we saw from different folks and like whether or not, former Vice President Harris was to blame or this, that, and the other. But like as an apparatus and as an ecosystem, the Democratic National Committee, the campaigns, because she inherited a campaign infrastructure and decision points. And there were decisions that were made that prioritized going after Never Trump Republicans, which in the 4 years of that administration, we never saw those appeals or anything really generating or garnering anything for the rest of us, which raises a whole other conversation about what bipartisanship really actually is and what its value really is. But like, people got platformed and elevated actually to our detriment. And we saw that as a practice from the Democratic Party at the federal level. I say this all the time and people like get mad at me, but like, Democrats threw Georgia on the bus. Like, Georgia handed the country an amazing victory and win, right? We were one of the states that helped seal the deal for the 2020 election, which we've been a target ever since because of it. And then that victory, that trifecta, was squandered in some ways, right? Because of this need to placate the very few so-called moderate Republicans or moderates in the mix that weren't willing to do what was necessary for the greater good of the country because they were still trying to play their internal party politics. The other side of that, though, is what happened after January 6th and the rise of the election deniers and the position we got put in because decisions were made to lionize people and treat them like they were heroes because they told Trump no on this one little aspect. Cool, I get it. You ain't want to go to jail. I got friends, they be on bullshit. I'm not trying to go to jail and do a bid for them either, right? Like, that's a shared universal thing. But people talked over us and did not listen to the experience we were having with these same individuals, many of whom are now running for statewide office here in Georgia. And I know we're about to get into that, but like, there were calculations that were made that maybe felt good in the moment, or this need to put the institutionalism above real accountability. And we've never had a real accountability for all the stuff that was leading up to 2020 and 2021. And now on the other side of it, we've been dealing with the brunt of it. And now here we are in 2026 with what we've seen happen at the national level in terms of the Voting Rights Act and SCOTUS and what we're experiencing here in Georgia. I mean, the Georgia State Election Board, the conservative, the Republican majority on that board, all voting is local. They're among their top 10 election deniers. The entire like that faction on the board, right? Because of the things that they're doing. And part of what we've seen, whether it's the harassment that has happened to voters because of the unlimited voter challenges that are more often than not by a small group of people targeting the mass
Uh-huh.
amount of people they can to disenfranchise folks, whether we see the state election board and how they're trying to gin them up so that they can take over, people's election boards. You've seen this happen into some smaller, county boards. And all that comes from SB 202, one of the pieces of legislation that while you were in the state legislature, and that for those of us that advocates and were tracking and mapping, came after that
Mhm.
so-called defense and standing up against Trump, right? Like that was an appeasement. That was supposedly, according to our former lieutenant governor, a bipartisan bill that just
Mhm.
wasn't that bad. That kind of, got some things fixed that we needed fixing, even though the election was fair. And so, you know, I say all that to say, like, where we are right now, all the stuff that's happening, and how we've had this placating of this moderation or this centrist
Mhm.
middle, when there are very clear things that are happening right now. We're talking about democracy. We're talking about
Mhm.
sides. And there's a sidestepping that's happening right now with this race, and particularly, I've talked around it, but with now Democratic candidate, but former Republican lieutenant governor,
Mhm.
former Republican Geoff Duncan, who up until like last spring sometime was still writing about how he was conservative in his column for the
Mhm.
AAC. You served with him in the House.
Yes.
And you were in the legislature when he was lieutenant governor. Can you talk with us some, like, just what you've been seeing right now in this moment about the logic, the case, the argument being made for not only why people should support him, but I'm just gonna say was a very racist, sexist,
Mhm.
just ridiculous frame that he's the only one that can do it in Georgia.
Right. He did so much damage. Not only did I serve with him, I also served on the Governmental Affairs Committee in the House. And that is the committee where all of the bad bills came through. So we dealt with election law. And so we saw every single voter suppression bill that, came through. And so it was not only SB 202, but there were other
Mm-hmm.
voter suppression bills that were backed by Republicans. And at that time, Geoff Duncan was the lieutenant governor. So he was the president of the Senate, which that person has the entire ability to say what bills will come to the floor. And so all of these things that we're experiencing now, whether it's suppression of voting rights, to abortion being banned in Georgia, to when Black folks said, hey, we need to have a real conversation about police accountability, and we need to have a conversation about the police murder and police brutality that is going on. Folks like Geoff Duncan saying, no, let's at the same time run bills that will protect the police from any sort of accountability. This man has done it all. And I saw it all from being on that committee, because that's where most of the bad bills came through. And so now to see people making the case that he is the only person can win, I think boils down to what I have always talked about. And this is not the first time we've seen it. We've seen it. We saw it in 2022. A lot of folks don't know, but a lot of the top of the ticket, as well as the Democratic Party, worked overtime to make sure that candidates who were anything other than Black in all of the statewide races would be lifted up and would get the nomination. So these coronations that happen in statewide office, this is the same thing that's going on with Geoff Duncan. You cannot pay me to believe that Geoff Duncan, who was just a Republican yesterday, will put all this energy into running a campaign for governor if he had not been told by somebody within the state party, probably lots of folks, that he would have some level of support. That's number one. He's not on a fool's errand. That's number one. Second thing is the folks who are not a part of the Democratic Party, and just the regular everyday voters who are trying to make the case for him, it's almost just like they're still believing that lie that the white man's ice is colder. And when I say
Mm.
that, what I mean
Mm-hmm.
is that a lot of their reasoning as to why he can do it, why he can actually secure a win for the Democrats, is that he will have some ability to bring moderate voters, to moderate Republicans over to vote for him as a Democrat, and will secure the state. This is wrong for so many reasons, because number one, you've got folks like a Brad Raffensperger on the Republican side, which I know both of their work because I also serve with Brad Raffensperger, who's running for governor on the Republican side. And anything you like about Geoff Duncan, Raffensperger is just a smarter Geoff Duncan. So that's number one. A matchup between the two, he's going to lose every day. The other thing is that this thinking of, a white man is what we need in order just to secure the nomination flies in the face of all the facts that we know. We know that the largest base of the Democratic Party is Black voters, and people like to vote for candidates that they feel can identify with their lived life experience. That's what we commonly call identity politics. What we have seen over the last 10 years, I would say, is that the person who we have run white men who were moderate, like Jason Carter for governor, and they didn't do well.
That was
The
my first
person who
election here in
came,
Georgia, was Jason
right,
Carter and
right, and
Michelle
Michelle
Nunn.
Nunn was running for US.
Hmm.
Right. The person who came the closest to securing the governor's seat was Stacey Abrams in 2018, where due to voter suppression, she lost by about 70,000 votes. So this logic around, hey, we need a white man who was a Republican yesterday to be able to deliver some magical votes that don't exist, is something that is going to produce worse results, I think, than what anybody really understands. And I have said myself, to me, there is no difference between a Geoff Duncan based on the values that he has and any Republican on the other side. Some folks, and I see this with, and I'll stop after this because I know I'm sure you got a lot to say, but people really don't realize that when you are in the communities that get marginalized the most often, and so in my opinion, that's Black folks, trans folks, um, folks who are making minimum wage, like when you're in the communities that get marginalized the most, you have the most pain, and you're able to see the differences between the two choices. So I feel like, so a lot of the folks who are supporting Geoff Duncan, contrary to the 5 Black folks that he's found to endorse him that he keeps holding up, is a majority white base who is able to say, oh well, a win at our on our side, no matter what, even if it is with somebody who was Republican yesterday, is still a win. No, it's not. A win for somebody who looks like me is somebody that I actually trust and believe is actually going to fight for us and did not give us all the damage that we currently have to live under. It's about trust.
There's so much there that you said that is so absolutely correct and right. And I think also what you were saying about how people, this false notion that somehow he's uniquely qualified to bring people into the, focus, like bring people into the tents, into our coalition to vote, to turn out, that somehow he's uniquely qualified to do that, when one, given his whole GOP 2.0 failed experiment and the desire not to run for reelection, right, in 2022, Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger are both on the record
Mhm,
as standing up to Trump, and both won their reelections, right, in part because of, like what I said, in terms of Democrats and people running with that narrative. We've also seen, and I would put 2022 as an example, we are more likely to have these conservative, moderate Democrats cross over and vote for a Republican that they think is deserving of another chance over the Democratic candidates themselves, right?
mhm,
There's no evidence, there's no data, there's nothing that shows that there is the potential for the Republican to Democrat crossover in the same way. It's been pretty, if you just look at the exit polling since like 2018 or so, it's been a pretty constant number. In 2024, Geoff Duncan as a national surrogate, again, that was a very failed strategy of platforming him, Liz Cheney, other folks,
mhm,
at the expense of people that actually spoke to the needs and issues of the base that did not turn out. So we have however many people that did not turn out in Georgia, and whatever insignificant, whatever, potential impact he might have had here in Georgia on that crossover, it was
mhm,
not nearly enough to close that gap. And so you're not going to be able to do that right now. And now what you're telling us is that in this moment, with the fight that we have in the cradle of civil rights, in some place that is the heart of democracy, and quite honestly, Georgia is also part of the heart of the original sin of the spread of slavery across the Union.
mhm,
When you think back to the late 1790s, when, they wanted to add more states, they wanted to create more territory, more states, and they wanted Georgia to cede land. Georgia demanded that for Mississippi and Alabama to be created, that they also would have to be allowed to have slavery, right? So we know that there's a very deep rooted history when we're talking about slavery, democracy, the suppression and oppression of Black political power that runs deep through here in Georgia. And it's not just Black political power, right? It's about people being able to have
mhm,
power to make decisions about the policies and issues that we need for our families and communities to thrive. But like on this Geoff Duncan piece, what is so interesting is also like, because he knows he did wrong, so he knows how to talk to the other side and make it right. But we've already seen what his compromising with the other side does when he was on the other side, right? We've already impacted that. And something you also were saying, Renita, too, is about like earlier on, you were talking about how like you were ready for a fight every
mhm,
session, every time you walked into that building. I found an interview that Geoff did back at a panel conversation he did back last February. This ain't before the Kamala thing. This is last February. But he's talking about how much fun it was those 4 years he was in the state house, right? But how, as lieutenant governor, like you were saying, he set the agenda. That's why he won it, because he wanted the power.
I ran for the job of lieutenant governor because in Georgia, the lieutenant governor gets to really set the tempo for the legislature. You pick the bills that come forward, you pick the committees and the chairs. It's actually a really important job for 40 legislative days out of the year. In those 4 years I was lieutenant governor in Georgia, we had an especially really fun time for those 4 years.
Renitta, was it fun for you? Because it wasn't fun for me in the galley in 2019 watching HB 481, HB 316 unfold. It wasn't fun for, I know, a lot of people who were protesting, but for you to have been at the heart of, in part of standing in the gap and literally putting your body on the line when it came to HB 481, was it fun for you?
No, it wasn't. And I would say it was very, I would call it traumatic having to watch, oppression being voted in real time every single day. Because what people don't realize is that a lot of the bills that are super harmful to communities like mine don't make it to the news. So there's a lot of stuff that the few controversial bills you see make it to the news. There's way more stuff that's going on that was so damaging. And so, as you mentioned, I was physically removed from the well trying to create a filibuster that doesn't even exist to get Georgia to not outlaw abortion. All of the voter suppression bills that we saw and, that I saw and fought against, all of those things having to work so hard. I felt like I had to watch my front, my back, my sides every single day. So for Geoff Duncan to say that it was so fun, well, I guess it was, because one thing that was quite clear to me in my first year in elected office was that most of the bills do not impact white men's life in a real way. So whether this bill passes or doesn't pass, they gonna be all right. And that was very, very clear, because when you look in society about who has the money to not be affected by many things that are becoming new laws or the laws that are already on the books, when you look at who has the access to, in situations where you need a benefit of the doubt not to be arrested when things are being overly criminalized, when you look at just really, when you just look at the fact that the majority of the laws that are being created today are still the laws that are best for the people who had the original right to vote, which is white male property owners. People like Geoff Duncan are all set. All of those things that I just mentioned, that benefit of the doubt when it comes down to whether or not you'll be arrested for something, white men get that, Black people don't. And so I understand how it is that you can have somebody like Geoff Duncan is not feeling the stress, because for him, these bills are just words on a paper. And if it doesn't work out, well, I mean, it's not going to impact his life if this happens to be a bad bill. Oh, it's like a oopsie, like what he's saying about refusing to expand Medicaid. I saw him on a panel where he said, oh, listen, everyone, I'm an expert on the fact that we need to expand Medicaid right now, because I know, because I have tried to expand Medicaid as every which way possible. And I'm here to tell you, you cannot do it cheaper or more effectively than just going through, just expanding Medicaid through like Obamacare. And so it's just, to me, the entitlement and the audacity of him to say now, please elect me as governor and trust that I will listen to you. The same voices that tried to talk to him the entire 4 years that he was lieutenant governor, and he was a master of ignoring Black and brown communities. You now want people's trust for you to go and do things that we told you all along needed to be done because we were feeling the pain. Miss me with all of that.
But he became a Democrat, and that allows him to open his heart to people now. Does that really, but seriously, Renitta, is it the fact that you have run and served and voted as a Democrat? Is that where your empathy and your compassion comes from, is your political alignment? Or is it something just deeper that maybe, and shout out to your mama, because I know that empathy runs in your family. But
It does.
because I really do feel like it's really insulting to a lot of our intelligence that it is, when even leaning in on his faith. And I wish we had more people of faith who would speak up about this, but even trying to lean in on the faith, or just talk about becoming a Democrat, he found it was easier to lean into his heart. I mean, as a person who claims to have a certain moral conscience, how can you go along with doing things that you were being told, and you don't have to find out by trial and error, right? Like,
Right.
because on the Medicaid expansion, there is like extensive documentation for
Mm-hmm.
years across multiple, even before he was elected, you know, or during his time in the House,
Right.
right? And then by the time he's lieutenant governor, we have Georgia Budget and Policy that was putting out, you know, countless studies there. And the people across the board in Georgia have wanted Medicaid expansion, right? Like that's just been a consistent
Absolutely.
thing. So we know all of these things. And yet there were like studies that are basically bridges to nowhere to talk about like tech
Mm-hmm.
effectiveness or pricing controls or whatever, right? Like nothing that really actually got at or there was his work around like the rural hospital tax credit that still required rural hospitals to have to still raise and do the fundraising, but people just got to take the tax credit for donating to them. It still didn't close the gaps. People
Mm-hmm.
have been able to utilize it because that's the tool that's been available. But it still didn't address the issue. And so we have those types of things. But then we do have something like HB 481, the 6-week abortion ban, and you know, the countless testimony, the long hearings, people, obstetricians, you know, medical officials, advocates, you, other folks
Mm-hmm.
gave their own, like I listened to you share your own personal abortion
Mm-hmm.
story, right? Which is already something that's so personal. And then for you in the position you were in to like do that, right, as a way of connecting with and bringing what
Mm-hmm.
the call to actions were for advocates to the floor, was just so powerful to watch, right? And I do want, and I know we've talked about this privately, but like watching you make that stance in that moment because of how important it is, and we're seeing elected officials do the same thing now, right? Angie Nixon down in Florida, you know, calling folks to action around what just happened with the shenanigans
Mm-hmm.
Florida just pulled, right? We see Charlene Oliver, we see Linda
Mm-hmm.
Lamar, we see people in Tennessee doing the same thing in the chamber and all the rules of decorum and all the other stuff, like whatever. But like, so we're seeing people do that now. But I remember 2019 when you did that. And I really feel like that was really the thing that galvanized a lot of the height of the protest and advocacy. We saw like the sin around the abortion ban because we literally saw you, we don't have the filibuster here, but we saw
Mm-hmm.
you on video literally refusing to yield your time because of how
Mm-hmm.
important this was and the fact that nobody on the other side was willing to listen to reason. Because there's nothing scientific, there's nothing factual, there's nothing about a 6-week abortion ban, which at the time it was passed was the most extreme ban in the country. And it was illegal because we still had the constitutional protection of
Mm-hmm.
Roe v. Wade. So there was no reason to do any of that except for what they knew was going to come. But like, can you talk to us about like having lived and worked through moments like that? Because you still have to go back into that chamber the next day as a
Right.
representative and
Right.
represent the people. And now we're in this moment, and the facts were the facts in
Right.
2019. They ain't changed none.
That's
Can you
right.
talk to us now about us being called and asked to get behind someone who couldn't even like listen to the reason or is going to go through anyway, or the science and the technology is on our side BS? That was, I
Right.
think, in a Political Rewind interview or one of the local interviews, like when it was passing, the smiling face, right? And the sea of people that don't look like us as they
Mm-hmm.
take away our rights. How does that feel, having been someone that's literally been a part of our vanguard on the front line of Georgia democracy, for now people to be like, okay, none of that matters because we just got to do this to win?
Well, like I said, I'm just not surprised because the people who are saying that the loudest are folks who don't have the live life experience to know what these bills actually will mean in their life. And so you talk about, where does my empathy come from? Yes, it comes from my family, but it also comes from being raised as a Black girl in the South. I know
Mm,
how policies, I know when I read policy, what that's going to be like in our community. And so that is what drives the willingness to stand up and to say, listen, this is going to be really bad. And I'm going to tell you all the reasons why. And these are all things that Geoff Duncan ignored. So as you mentioned, when I refused to leave the well, the speech that I was giving on the bill that essentially outlawed abortion, the entire speech was about how when you looked in other places, you've countries who have outlawed abortion and states that have outlawed abortion, what you see is maternal mortality increase. specifically for Black women. And so that's what my speech was about literally making the case that this is going to lead to poor health outcomes, worse outcomes, and Georgia's already the worst for maternal mortality. Now you fast forward to the bill has been enacted. It's in practice, and we saw the woman Adriana Smith, who passed away as she was early on in her pregnancy, and the state kept her alive artificially just so they could harvest the baby. That's the legacy of Geoff Duncan. So all of this other stuff that he is talking about now the lights are on for him. It's nothing but privilege that he had the ability to ignore all these things as people said this to him for years and years and years. The other thing that I would say is two other things. Before I was elected, I organized with Moral Monday along with Fight 15 and a lot of social justice campaigns. We did plenty of civil disobedience at the Capitol, old elderly folks sitting in to say we need to expand Medicaid. I mean, there is no shortage of information around expanding Medicaid that if he had just opened his ears, he could have been privy to that information. He also had no problem taking place in a very hateful campaign. When Brian Kemp ran for governor, one of the first things I did after being elected was run a legislators boycott against Kemp and his hateful speech. So, like, here's the thing: Duncan has been a part willingly and happily, smiling all the way, of what has been a part of a terrible administration under the Kemp administration. It is only, I would say, white male logic that you would ask for someone's trust now, and that you should be allowed to be in charge. And that folks, that you really think that people would trust you by you just now saying, oh, you know what, guys? I just figured out all of these things were the right ways to go to expand Medicaid. I mean, you had nothing but information and folks telling you.
It'd be different if he was like in a weird position where he was always like caucusing, or there was like a documentation of actual effort before the run that doesn't include getting on agreeing to a nationally televised spot to give a speech, right? That doesn't include however you try to leverage your proximity to Blackness and other people as an example of how you've worked with folks, when there are countless examples of the opposite, right? That
Right.
doesn't include, really writing ridiculous columns in the AJC as you're trying to placate the right and talk about the benefits of the 2017 tax cuts becoming permanent, or pontificating a couple of days before Christmas in 2024, again, after the Kamala endorsement in the election, about how Elon Musk is so smart and, potentially Doge could do good things. And these are all clips. These are all things that are publicly available, that folks can make reference of. And I know that, you teamed up, a part of, folks from Working Families Party here in Georgia, put out a video about, Never Duncan, and calling, into community. What I've heard from folks is that there's been like a resounding, like, okay, thank you for saying the quiet thing out loud, right? There are those folks though that are again doing the conflict averse, anxiety, scary thing, like, oh, we don't need to trash our own one. He ain't mine. I mean, y'all claim if you want to, but then also like just thinking about how we're damaging our chances in the long run. I feel like, Renitta, there's so much wrong with all of this, but I think part of it is like the gamification of our politics and how we act like it's a zero-sum game and that we can only win one way, or that accountability, right, and calls and demands for accountability are also part of, because it's not that the campaign never tried to have conversations with folks, but like I feel like folks wanted it, but it was in a way to help him be better. And that's not actually accountability, right? Like, because there's been ample time for this man to really like step back and do assessment, listen, build, form community. And that never happened, right? And so like all this chasing folks, because again, like if we have issues and we have policies, it shouldn't be a problem to be able to go talk to people about these are the issues, these are the policies, this is what we can do if we all vote together. But we can't get past the years, the decades, the generations of propaganda and lies that have made white voters in particularly unwilling to join us and vote in these ways. And not all white voters, right? But a
Right.
large share have been targeted by propaganda, have been, positioned and culturated and socialized in a particular way. They think that everything Democrats say are lying. They think they believe the negative stereotypes they hear about Black people in those places or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
But this has come from people like Geoff Duncan, to your point, who have been a part of, administrations and campaigns and spaces where we have been that they have been ripening up and ginning up the base. I mean, that 2018 campaign was full of racist rhetoric and a commentary. We've seen the Georgia Republican Party over the years, while he was still a part of it, as one of the
Mm-hmm.
top leaders in the state, engaging in very racist behavior and make unfounded claims about, before 2020 even came, right, about non-citizens voting, right? That's the whole reason why we had the issue with was that with HB 316 around the exact match,
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm-hmm.
the way things happen. So like, but don't even get me started about this debacle we're in with these voting machines and the QR code, and how y'all and everybody else
Right.
tried to warn them back in
Yep.
2019 about them
Yep.
damn machines and
Right.
where we are right now, right? Like
That's
there were
right.
so many moments. And when
Mm-hmm.
you are a part of so many moments and have done
Mm-hmm.
nothing besides whatever background conversations, fundraising, grease and palms, paying people that you've done. And I'm sure he's a very nice person. Maybe. I don't know. People are very nice to folks, and then they can still be shitty to other folks is the real thing,
Right.
right? Because I hear that from folks like, well, he was really nice and I really liked him. That's really great. I mean, that's awesome. But like, that still does not even account for the way in which he has shown up and the space he's been a part of. Because again, up until like probably Trump's reelection around early 2025, he was still trying to build a better conservative America
Absolutely.
in all of the nice, respectable language and
Right.
quoting
Absolutely.
Reagan that they want to quote. And so like, my question for you, Renitta, is people get really caught up in the respectability politic of it all,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the appearances, in the like, we just need to have, because some of his thing is about like tone and empathy. And like that tone policing, the tone, it doesn't matter that, like when you look at, the policies, when you look at the 80s and you look
Mm-hmm.
at Reagan and like the damage that was done, because that's also like his go-to, and that whole, he has this quote that he does about like someone who agrees with you 80% of the time, but that doesn't 20% of the time isn't your enemy or whatever. It's some badly paraphrasing some Ronald Reagan quote, but someone who is diametrically opposed to like my existence 20%
Right.
of the time, someone who spends their 20%, and let's be real, it's a lot more than 20%, but
Exactly.
who spends 20 for we're just going for the hypothetical for the sake of it, who spends their time, that 20%, diametrically opposed to my rights, my freedom, my existence, my self-determination, cannot be my friend 80%
No.
of the other issues, because you're literally working against me and my right
Right.
to exist.
Right. No, that's exactly what it is. And it goes back to the heart of what I was saying before, even with Democrat elected officials, is that this always reaching to say that something is not so bad, or, this person, is not as radical as you think. I mean, people did that with Kemp after he ran that ad to get elected governor, where he said he was going to round up, and these are his words, not mine, but going to round up illegal aliens in his truck himself. I mean, that is the type of stuff that people will now say, oh, well, I don't think that he's as bad as Trump. Well, I mean, he told you he was. It's your choice if you want to listen. So to your point, this whole business about Geoff Duncan being nice, well, what I call nice is not voting, not advancing oppression against other communities. That's what I call being nice. Not will you shake my hand and will you smile in my face, because that is absolutely nothing. We have experienced nice white racism in this country for so long that civility that he covers it with does not change the impact. And that is what, folks need to focus on. So some folks are like, well, can't somebody change? Can't they have a second chance? Listen, if you claim that you have changed now and you want to have a second chance by sitting your ass down. You don't need to be running for governor. No, because
That's a
it's
very
just
real
crazy.
and different issue, right?
Because yeah, but also, like, to your point, you said, oh, well, maybe he says that he didn't have time to show that his heart has changed. Well, I beg to differ. He did have time to write a book basically saying that he agrees with everything that Trump is saying. He just thinks that Trump's tone is wrong. And see, that's how insidious nice white racism moves. You still want you want the policies that have that same impact of disenfranchising communities. You just want it said nicer. And that is what Ronald Reagan did. So, I mean, it's the same shit over and over and over again. So what I want people to do is not be impressed by, oh, he'll shake my hand and he'll talk to me and he's nice to me. That should not matter for anything.
Yep.
You need to be looking at what he supports. And the last time that I looked, maybe he's updated this, but the last time I looked, he didn't even have anything on his website as he's currently running for governor now as a Democrat. He didn't have policies on his website. So what is it
He has some statements now, but like
statements or policies?
I think he has like some value statements or whatever, not
Which
actual
is not
agenda.
right.
I have
Right.
not looked like in the past like couple of weeks. But
Right.
to your point though, something that I know like that has been a sticking point I've had other folks raise is that like even around like because like we know there are things that are really major issues with him, like buried in a section around like healthcare or whatever is mention of like Black maternal mortality and abortion, like kind of in one sentence together.
Right.
That's insufficient, my guy. Like, what?
No, he's using buzzwords. And I heard his statement about what he
Mhm.
said about he said we will repeal 481 and we will something else he said. And I said, see, that shows me he doesn't even understand the issue because the things that you need to do to actually increase Black maternal health in the state of Georgia, there's many more things that need to be done other than repealing 481. He doesn't understand the issues, but there are folks who have told him buzzwords for him to say. And I think it is important that, you know, candidates should always have policy on their page. We need to know what you're committing to. And so, like you said, I haven't looked in the last couple of weeks, but I do know at the point that he was getting a rise in support, he had not committed to any policy on his page. And people were just supporting him because of what I said earlier. They believe that the white man's ice is colder. Because here's the other thing. And you would have to believe that the white man's ice is just inherently colder and that he could just win because he's a white man. And I say that because there are too many other candidates that are running for governor that are basically similar to Duncan in that his level of moderation, his level of, if you believe that that is what we need to win an election is somebody who is completely moderate, you have other candidates who have a moderate reputation and who have more experience than Geoff Duncan. So why not them? Yes, because they're not white men.
I mean, and if we just think about it, I know the other like top three, and then, you know, there are other candidates too, but I know when we're talking about, you know, former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, you know, former DeKalb County Commissioners, DeKalb County CEO, Michael Thurman, and, you know, former State Senator Jason Estevez, like all three of those people, right, have more detailed plans or statements or just very clear like articulations of policy and wherever you land on like who you support or whatever, like they all have that, right? If we're saying that's the thing. And all three of them, again, regardless of where you land or which personal issue, maybe whoever, are way more credible than Duncan in terms of we at least know that you've been on this team and you at least generally know that these are the policies, right? We also have State Representative Derek Jackson. Also, I'll add, you know, in that list also who still, you know, a state representative that has, you know, released like policies and discussing things in detail that we don't get from a Geoff Duncan. And out of all of these people, right? Yes, only two of them have ever served statewide, Michael Thurman and Geoff Duncan. But Michael Thurman did it as a Black man and as a Democrat.
Right.
At a very different time in Georgia as well, right? And you know, Geoff Duncan did it on Kemp's coattails with the Kemp agenda that he was lockstep in as lieutenant governor. And his whole thing, like when again going back to this, there's a forum, like folks, the link, y'all can go listen to the whole thing if you want to, and I'm sure maybe you'll fall in love with him even more, but you can see more of what I'm talking about. That he was talking about how one, even last year, even after his support of Kamala, because again, being never Trump is not enough, about how he would still support Kemp if Kemp were to run. He would still support Kemp. He was toying with the idea last February, if Kemp was going to run for Senate against John Ossoff, he likes John because he wasn't going to support anyone else because they were Trumpers. But because of Kemp, he puts in a different category. He would have supported Kemp. And just when you look at everything he said over the years about Kemp, about their time, about what their leadership has been for the state, like you said, it's that respectability. It is that civility. The civility is the difference between a white citizens council and the KKK. Right? Absolutely. We have the community members and the white picket fences and the families still being extremely racist and harmful to our people. but they were nice about it. And and we would argue and say they weren't really nice, but they weren't KKK, right?
Right.
That's such a huge chasm, right? Like that's such a big difference if that's what we're going to say. So like, if we're going to say someone's not Trump, there's so much more harm. And we've had this for years of Republican policies and conservative agenda on our communities. We've also seen like what having, a nice conservative in Reagan and Bush and others like has done in terms of like the using harmful stereotypes of our community to pass harmful policies. And Democrats in their need, like you were saying, to be appeased and to have bipartisanship have gone along with this to also hurt our community, which leaves a lot of our folks feeling disillusioned, which leaves a lot of our folks feeling like we have no place to call home. And I don't see, like, when I think about political home, I think about it in terms of organization, not as not as the party, right? Like the party is a vehicle, right? The ballot access, the vehicle, I think about it in terms of organization, but there are people that part of their socialization and their orientation is that like, I need my club, I need my space, I need my people. But also like, we're looking at this landscape, we're looking at this election, we're thinking about what matters, and we're getting this one message. But then we have this broader opportunity, like you said, we have multiple other people who are running, right? For governor and just down the entire ballot. And folks, something, I know I ruffle some feathers on my little commentary, and that's fine. People can be mad at me, but I stand by what I said. And I do appreciate the opportunity for other conversations because one thing you know about me, Renitta, and a lot of folks who do know me know this, like, we need to just like air it out, right? We need to clear the air and say things that need to be said and talk about what does it look like to build accountability into our processes and not say, oh, we don't got time for that. At what point do we make time for these very difficult things? Because we're always going to be in a state of crisis. We're always going to be combating. We might have, less crisis and more calm, but we're always going to still be defending and trying to maintain our wins. So we can't keep sidestepping these very real conversations about how people show up, about how they do things, about what we need. And what you said about the organized demand, because I truly believe, Renitta, regardless of who emerges as the nominee, I do feel like there needs to be organized demands from people in terms of what we see coming into Georgia, like going into this general election, because we already know that when all the money starts pouring in, when the consultants from DC or wherever start showing up, when everybody else starts talking over Georgia, because we've seen it happen already in the past, right? People start talking over us and don't know the lay of the land, don't know the opportunities and the possibilities of what people need. And so it just seems like no matter who emerges, we're going to need that like real clear demand and ask. But we also need people to understand that making that demand and ask of folks, it's not harming them. It's not doing the other side's work. Like, I just feel like we are in such a weird position because there's not really as much organization to hold that type of work consistently. Unless we're like stand up around election cycles, but then also like, it just seems like, and I'll just put it out there. Like, we've talked a lot about Geoff Duncan, what he is and isn't, and what he's not doing, and like why he ain't it. And I know, like, all the rest of us who are very clear about Geoff Duncan, we don't have like very, clear alignment or agreement on all the other candidates that are running. But one thing that has come up is this idea that because, former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is dominating polls, and there's a lot of issues with polls for a lot of different reasons now in 2026 that maybe we would not have said the same thing 8 years ago. But like, when you have polls that are being bragged about, that are being run by right-leaning, entities that are also running commercials about how being anti-data center is really being pro-China, that's a flag for me, right? Like we gotta get clear, but like the polls and how they're polling people also don't dictate the votes and the outcomes, right? So this idea that people need to drop out, or that if we have a contested primary, it's the problem that we saw in our mayoral election, or it's what we saw happen to, the former vice president. It just seems like there's this, and it's not, and you and I were talking about this earlier about how there are things that, the former mayor is being held accountable for, or people are going at her for, that maybe if she was a man, we would not. And certainly if she was a white person, right? So there's like this layered issue happening here, right? About Black women's leadership and the way Black women are held to certain standards. But there's also this conversation because of what has happened nationally around Black women that's just being put on this conversation and this election, that there isn't the space to kind of have any of that engagement analysis. And then we also have all the men that she's running against, that are not necessarily being held to varying different standards, right? So it's just like, there's so much happening there. And there are these demands by people who maybe they are here in Georgia, maybe they're not, but they're like sharing messaging and directives and admonishing people en masse in a way that's not helpful. And like, how do we
Right.
move people to action, right? How do we actually get people to engage?
This is why people continue to check out of wanting to work with Democrats. You know, I've never been a party person. I was an activist before I got elected. Democratic Party is not really trying to be fooled up with so many folks who are strict, you know, on the activist side. And I don't care about that because I only ran because of issues. But I'll say this, everything that you mentioned about people trying to shut down conversation during the primary is the insidious thing that continues to have Democrats lose elections. And I say it because of this reason. The best thing that can happen to our candidates or whoever the nominee is going to be is for them to have a knockdown, drag out fight in the primary, because that makes the candidate stronger.
Yeah.
Because they are you get to find out whether your candidate that you think you want can take a punch, and how they will respond to that. Because guess what? When they get past the primary and headed on their way to November, it's nothing but punches from the Republicans. The other thing it does is it allows you get more information around you get to find out the true democracy of what the people in the public, how strong their support is. The Democratic Party has done this over and over again, where they try to do these coordinations, and I'm talking state level Democratic Party as well as national. They try to do these coordinations that silence really hearing from the people how much they really support this person. So they do that to get through the primary, and then they start beating people over the head to say, now you better vote for this person. But we told you to shut up during the primary when you were just trying to say how you felt about the candidate. So in my opinion, as somebody who's been elected many times and had to fight to get elected, I mean, I had to unseat an incumbent to win my first election. 95% of people who try to unseat an incumbent fail. Those are the statistics. And I was able to win my election. I'm speaking from experience. Having fights in the primary and going at each other's throats only makes you a stronger candidate, so that when you emerge after the primary, you are ready to take on the Republicans who will show you no mercy. All of the the opposition research has been done because people are running real campaigns against each other. Think about what happened in 2022, where the party worked so hard to coordinate Charlie Bailey for lieutenant governor. And then, and there was almost no opposition research that was, well, there was some that was done during the primary. And I was in that race. And so there were those of us who, you know, heard Charlie end with every speech saying, vote for me and you'll never have to apologize, which seemed very racist considering everyone else in the race was nothing but Black candidates. It was almost like, don't vote for them because you're going to get a October surprise you don't want. So stick with me and I'm so safe.
It's
What
very
happened after the
reminiscent to what we're
primary?
hearing right
He
now.
had a surprise, right? It's because it's
Yeah.
the same thing all the time. What happened after the primary? He had a surprise from Burt Jones. Burt Jones figured out that this was not on the record, but he had been arrested for DUI and it was just kind of covered up. So this is the point that I'm making with that, is that by coddling our candidates in the primary, we're not doing them any favor. We're not figuring out, are they real fighters? Can they fight their way out of a paper bag when they get punched by another candidate? You are not getting all of the opposition research that probably needs to be heard. So that is, and most importantly, you're not getting a full measure of how much the public really supports that candidate, because you're silencing dissent and you're manufacturing consent that this has to be our person, that everybody just needs to shut up and vote for them. And guess what? Voters will not. There are a lot of people who are, conflict adverse. That's not me, but there are a lot of people who are. And what they will do, and I have found time and time again, voters are great about, they're not going to fight with you on Facebook. They're not going to fight with you in the streets about a candidate. They will just sit home and not vote. And that'll be that. It'll be zero conversation.
And that's the problem right now, right? Like you touched on a few different things, and I appreciate you sharing that example too from the 2022 primary, right? About Charlie Bailey, who also ran in 2018 and was uninspiring at every stretch of the imagination, and somehow managed to like just keep failing up and is now like head of the state party. But like, again, someone else I'm sure is very nice and people like, but when you're just really talking about how like that whole, like, you'll never have to apologize again or whatever. I mean, we're witnessing that in this race now, where you literally have a white man, former Republican, like as of last year, on a stage with a bunch of Black people, talking to a bunch of Black people in a state where Black people have been at the vanguard, have been putting bodies on the line, even, in our modern era, in terms of voting rights and other, of our rights and liberties and freedoms and stuff, claiming that no one else has sacrificed more than him, right?
Right.
Or claiming that he's the only one that can do something, or talking
Mm-hmm.
about the threats. And again, to be clear, whatever threats, whatever antagonism that his family has gone through, none of that is, valid. But you and I know people, a lot of us have had experiences, and we know people who have literally had to walk around with armed security 24/7 in 2020, 2022, like after various points, because of the way that party weaponized and did things. We know, I mean, we're watching the attack on, poll workers here in Fulton County happen, unfold, just as we watched it happen with Shay Moss and her mom, you know what I'm saying? Like,
That's right.
Nationally, right? So we've seen these different things. So the positioning is absurd, and it speaks to a particular element, but we're not having some of these very real conversations that we needed to have even before now. That people are just in such a rush to kind of just prove that they're never Trump or they're somehow better than the other side, but we're just not having these real conversations. The other thing that you spoke to about the manufactured consent, and how, like, when we're saying certain things or telling people certain things or admonishing them because they didn't do this, whatever, how it makes people sit out. And we're in a moment right now with this primary, like, one, it is important that we do have the engagement, we do have the interaction, but we also have nonpartisan races on the ballot for a Supreme Court, that this is their general. So if people sit out of the primary, we lose an opportunity to get these, down ballot wins and pickups on our state Supreme Court that we actually need, because folks were too busy telling people that they don't like Black women and they're not doing X, Y, and Z, and people are catching strays for no reason. Because people are very vocal and adamant in their support for, the former mayor. And I do appreciate, like, your pushback. And I know some other folks have, like, kind of pushed back on me, particularly because I have a post that's like, we got to support Black women and da. And my whole thing is like, well, the mayor herself has examples of history in our recent history when she is mayor, or she in this position has not supported Black women. And I can count them on down the list, including some recently when she was executive producer of the Tyler Perry Show, which stole from someone else's, work. And they had to change the name. It's no longer called She the People. It's called Miss Governor, because there was a cease and desist. There was stuff involved, and she knows, folks involved. So those things might seem petty, but like, for me, it's not about attacking her or holding her accountable. Like, my irritation, my aggravation comes from people with platforms and access who we've watched. I mean, in our mayoral race, right? We've seen some of the same creators in our 2021 race, where it was Felicia Moore against Andre Dickens. Felicia was the front runner that entire race, well up into the last minute of in the primary and in the runoff. And by that same logic, if people should have dropped out, Andre was not polling well at all. He was always, the logic was never that he was going to win. So by that logic, the same logic people have right now, he should never have continued in that race, right?
Right.
But we also have people spread disinformation because all their issues with Felicia or whatever. And I'm not saying that there's no reason or issue to critique her or whatever, but people actually lied and said she was going to do things to galvanize folks. And then we saw this shift happen. So there's a lot of stuff that's never been held accountable. We see a lot of dirtiness happening because people want to push what they want to push for who they're pushing for, that isn't actually about we, the voters, we, the people, and what is the best for the overall, like, governance and structure we need. And that's really where my issue is. And I think candidates, even though candidates don't always control the people that support them, right?
Right.
Or things that are being said in their support, there is something, because when you do have relationships, when you do have people, there is something that as a campaign, as a candidate, you can set the tone for how people are engaging on your behalf. And I know you and I have talked about this too. I know I've heard a lot of people say, like, nobody's really exciting me. I mean, it's different right now because we know it's crunch time, we know it's go time, and we know the stakes are high. But like, for months, the race was pretty much quiet from a lot of folks because we were just like, no one's really exciting me. I'm really not clear. I mean, I know you and I had this conversation like 3 months ago, like, not really sure if there's any who to get behind or whatever the case may be. Very clear that Duncan was a no, and it was aggravating us. But like, in terms of the rest of the field, like, the way things were shaping up and just like how people were building, it was just like, eh. And we've been deprived, I think, of a real robust primary process and real conversation. I know the digital also makes it super messy now too, compared to like prior iterations of, electoral politics, but it just seems like we have to have a container. We have to have a space to kind of like deal with some of this stuff. But shutting down the discourse, shutting down the
Right.
conversations preemptively, and
Mhm.
telling people like they're doing the same thing, like we're going to let another Mary Norwood win, like if we don't all just get behind one person, I don't think that even helps make the best case for Keisha, right?
Right. Well, right. And like I said, you're hurting any candidate that you're supporting, you're hurting them if you're protecting them because you are not giving them the opportunity to shine and show why more people should support them. If you're making it really, really easy for them to get the nomination, I'm not saying to go out of your way to make it hard, but what I am saying is if there is authentic, organic concerns that folks have, people should be saying it. Now, I do think that some things that are being said about Keisha are things that it's y'all would never say this about. If it wasn't a Black woman, you would not be saying it. Even in the same race where some folks are like, oh, I don't like that after the first year, she said she didn't want to be mayor anymore. Okay, but she continued to do the job. She did serve out her term. You have people in the race who
Right.
literally quit the jobs that they were in to run for governor.
In
Jason
multiple
Estevez quit the Senate, right?
and multiple,
So
we've seen that in the lieutenant governor race. We've seen in multiple people,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of the criticism I think she's getting is unfair, but then there are other policy criticisms, and whatever you want to base your criticism on, the fact is, I believe that everybody should be allowed to speak. And I think that the Democratic Party needs to do way more. And I keep saying Democratic Party, but I mean Democratic leaders. I think the people who are trying to influence elections need to do way more of listening to organic chatter of what people are saying instead of telling people to be quiet because they're going to hurt the race. What hurts the race is you not finding out until November that people don't really jive with this candidate. And the way you find out is when you lose the election and then you see how many people stayed home. That is what hurts. That's what loses an election, not people airing stuff out right now and getting used to whatever it is that you don't like about that candidate. So, for example, we've seen this happen time and time again where Democrats have worked so hard to keep folks quiet on what they consider to be the negatives of that candidate. And then that conversation gets brought out after the primary. And then you have folks, even on the Democrat side, say, oh, well, I didn't know this about that person. How come nobody told me? I would have never voted for that person. It's like, this is because you're squashing all of the conversation. And we need more democracy, not less. And so this is where yes, Republicans are good for doing voter suppression and like structural lessening of democracy, but Democrats do it in a very social way. And that is the telling people to shut up as they voice their opinions, whether you agree with those opinions or not, about candidates. That is the coronations, telling people to shut up and blaming people when we don't get a result that we want in an election. When at the end of the day, and I'm here to tell you firsthand, as a candidate, if you lost your race, it's your job to get folks to vote for you. I did not win the lieutenant governor's race. Was there lots of interference and coordination going on by party leadership and the party? Absolutely. Did that contribute to my loss? Absolutely. But there are things also that I did wrong that could contributed to, I don't think my race was long enough. I was also serving as a legislator while I ran. So I only had 3 months to campaign. So, and raise money. So there are things that, I could have done better, as well as other things that were at play. And so I'm just saying that what we need is more opportunity to have discussions, open discussions,
Yeah.
on the left, so that folks can really engage in democracy. And all of this will make our candidates stronger. It doesn't make them weaker.
I appreciate you sharing that. I also appreciate that point of vulnerability for you too, in the reflection from 4 years ago, but also just like this, even like how this all comes together and works, right? Because the idea that we don't have time, we're literally a week left in the primary, folks, could still early vote through the end of this week. We have election day, Tuesday, May 19th. Like the fact that we don't have time, we're running out of time, or we got to just make sure this one person doesn't have to go into runoff. Runoffs are going to happen whether it's the top of the ticket or not, right? Like that's going to happen. That's the structure of Georgia's cycle. It's going to happen on both sides. It also, like what you're saying about like, just again, like the air of inevitability, the manufactured consent, like all these things, like it also makes people feel like it doesn't matter what they do. So we're at a time right now when we're literally seeing the voter suppression. We're literally seeing like the ways in which people are coming for our vote, or coming for our rights, or coming for our ability to choose for ourselves. And then we have people on our side telling us like, you don't get to make a choice for yourself. It might not be for the same reasons, and people might have good intentions on why they're doing it, but like you're saying, like it causes harm and it compounds a moment where we really need people stepping in their fullness and showing up for the long haul. And I know people have a lot of fatigue because it's like, oh, they've been saying at least the last 10 years, if not more, this is the most important election, like everything's at stake. But it's true, though, that elections are really important. And instead of saying this is the most important election, like changing that orientation and like, what does it mean for us to show up? What does it mean for us to questions? And maybe if more people are like modeling that accountability in their own support and their own like work, it would help people also understand how to engage better instead of just saying like, and I I know I could be a flamethrower and like I make inflammatory statements and sometimes people don't like it, but my point still remains that like we have people who are trying to drown out everyone else and raise, narratives. And like, we already know the way the algorithm is set up. If you don't like having large followings, being viral isn't the same as being right or isn't the same as like having a solid analysis either. That's just who's been able to put time and energy into building up their platform and reach. You and I know this very well.
Right.
But like we are in a moment right now where we really do need to be having more of these basic bread and butter conversations around like how the politics works, how we show up and what we should be. We should be asking stuff of people. We should be making demands because these are the people who are going to need us to stand up with them and support them. I mean, and then we need to be there. Like if we get people to stand up and do the things we need to do, we also need to go and stand up and be there. And then we also need to be able to pull their coattail like, hey, you said this.
Yeah.
We need you to do this. But we
Well,
also need to show up when
yeah.
people are showing up for us too.
It's also too the other thing too that I think keeps getting missed in all these conversations is that when I talked before about showing what is the real support for that candidate, the way that elections are all about turnout. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot win an election by saying, oh, well, listen, I know all these people who didn't vote. They are registered voters. I know they would have voted for me. So let's add that into my count. No, you can't do that. You can only get elected by people going out and actually, affirmatively casting a vote for you. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you have a real primary, a robust primary that is where you're not trying to coordinate candidates, but you're just letting people organically be for their candidate and you're letting people have organic conversations, letting the primary actually be organic instead of manufactured. You then come out with candidates where the voters who supported them have fought hard to get them. They did not get browbeat into supporting a single person. They honestly and truly support that candidate. So what that translates to is on the other side, when it's time to go up in November, you have folks who are willing to door knock for that candidate. You have that enthusiasm for that candidate. You have folks who are willing to make phone calls, give money. When you do these coronations, what happens is these folks get the nomination and then you don't see any of that organic, hey Anoa, have you heard about this candidate? I think you should get excited about this candidate. Oh, you don't know about him? Let me tell you about him. You don't have that. And that's what that lesser of two evils stuff is, which is what is bringing us to this point over and over again. And Democrats, we're losing elections because winning off of the lesser or two evils, basically just making the point of, hey, well, I'm just not Trump. That is not anything that inspires folks to want to go that extra mile, which you need to go if you're trying to win any type of large election, like president or for governor, because the larger the election, the harder it is to talk to voters. So you have to have people on the ground who are honestly excited about you, who are going to tell everybody they know, hey, make sure you vote. And let me tell you how great this candidate is. When you just put somebody up and you have not tested if the public's actually excited about that candidate, what you get is somebody who has soft support and you end up having to browbeat people into voting for them. And so folks may give you their vote, but they're not going to give you all that extra that the candidate needs, which is their time door knocking, their money. They're not even going to discuss the election with their friends. And that is what we have seen so often. And so, it's just organic is always the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it builds momentum and the energy that we need, not just for this election cycle, but for the long haul. Because we're not going to just magically, we win all the things, all the seats and all the things that we need to win in 2026. It's not going to magically make everything better, right? Because we know we have to win all the things. There's still like the harm to address. There's still the response from the other side that we have to grapple with. And then we still got to look towards the horizon because we know we got 2028. We know we got municipals at various intervals in between there. And we know we got the census and all this other stuff coming on the horizon that are still very much important that we got to keep in mind several years down the road. So like building that muscle, helping people understand like the how and the why it matters for their engagement and their like that needs to be our center point. And it's great that we got some people who are really passionate. Well, with the exception of one person, right? Like it's so great that we got some people who are really passionate about like leading and being, at the forefront. But like this idea, like humans are chaos. Everyone is flawed. Nobody is perfect. Everyone has something that somebody's not going to like, but we can't worry about what the other side, because the other side also will just make up shit, right? They
Right.
also just say stuff. They do things.
Right.
They run disinfo campaigns. We know this. So it really even doesn't even matter because they're going to do whatever they're going to do anyway. And when you focus on what the other side is going to do and not running your race, when you're not making sure you have the strongest possible like cadre together that you can do to make sure you can win, that's how we lose. Right. We're already starting from a losing position. And so like, I really appreciate you for making the time. And I just want to give you the last word as we're heading into this final sprint around the 2026 Georgia primary.
Yeah, I just think that people need to, really fight for their voices to be heard as it relates to these candidates, because I just think that you're doing, honestly, candidates should be grateful for any feedback they get from the public, because that tells you why they are not supporting you and what you need to do to get their support. And to your point, what you were just saying, the right will just make up anything. But I've also seen the right do an excellent job of telling the truth on candidates that we shielded in the primary. They get past the primary and the right starts telling the truth on them. And that's something that is, then we're stuck. We're up a creek without a paddle. Right. Because you shielded this candidate from everything. So, it's, it's going to be an interesting election season. I'm glad to have had this conversation with you today. I think these conversations are important, whether people want to hear them or not. These are the important conversations, because I know that you and I are just saying out loud what many people are thinking in their heads and just won't say it because they don't want to catch any smoke. But you and I don't care about catching smoke. So
I mean, once you get smeared on public radio, naturally,
that's how we met.
That's how we
When
met.
you were going through that
That's
crisis.
how we met.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I do just want to say publicly, like, thank you so much, because how we met 8 years ago was a moment of crisis and a moment of not being sure if I could stand up a certain way. And, I was being tapped to moderate a panel with you all. And you and I had not actually met each other yet. We were going to be doing a prep session, but you got my contact information. You reached out to me and you were like, hey, I just want to check in with you and see how you're doing and let you know, like, it's okay. And this is what's happening, whatever. But everything you said, Renitta, I just, again, wanted to just thank you for always your like clarion voice, your leadership, and your willingness to like step in and stand up for folks, whether you personally know them or not. Like, you did not know me to stand up for me 8 years ago. And I've watched you and your advocacy and your leadership, and I definitely appreciate you in the conversation.
Thank you.
And just how you show up. And so my hope is that everyone, if you have not voted already, like, go vote. Tell 5 friends to join you. And, just stick with your values, right? And if your values is even something that we talked about and we don't agree on it, cool. As long as you feel good and comfortable with the decision you made, but really asking folks to look at the bigger picture and to consider some of the things we've talked about. So, Renitta, I appreciate you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a Georgia primary special with The Way with Anoa. Stay tuned for more.